70s was the beginning of a new age in comic books, the Bronze Age. This is where kids that grew up reading comic books now became artists and creators themselves for comic books. It all started with Green Lantern 76 by Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil. Creators are now dealing with more adult themes and content in the comic books. Gone were the days of those campy comic stories, and now they're dealing with real issues like alcoholism, drug use, and even death of loved ones. This mixed with the Comics Code Authority now easing up on their strict rules, the code now allowed for things like drug use, zombies, werewolves, ninjas, and vampires. Because of these changes, it paved the way for a bunch of new type of characters like Tomb of Dracula, Werewolf by Night, Morbius, Ghost Rider, and many others. These weren't your typical type of heroic heroes. This was a new type of heroes. This was the rise of the anti-hero. So in this video, we're going to look at the top 10 comic books from the 1970s for investing. At number 10, we got the first appearance of the Phoenix and the start of the extremely popular run by Cockrum and Claremont, the Phoenix Saga. Claremont had become enamored with Jean Grey, and he couldn't wait to start writing her stories in the X-Men series. But Len Wein had already begun to phase her out. But by issue 97, when Claremont had already taken over as the main writer, he brought her back and took her from one of the weakest X-Men to one of the most powerful with the Phoenix Saga. Jean Grey has been the main focal point for many of the X-Men movies. They attempted to do a version of the Phoenix Saga twice, with X-Men 2 and 3 in 2006 and then the Dark Phoenix in 2019. She appeared as Marvel Girl in X-Men 1 and has been part of the team ever since. In 2022, a 9.8 averaged 6,600. In 2017, averaged about 2,500. And in 2012, a 9.8 averaged of almost 1,100. That had a 5-year return of 159%, a 10-year return of 500%, with a record price of $9,600 in 2022. Incredible Hulk 180, the first cameo appearance of Wolverine. At first glance, this seems just like another Hulk fights a big monster of the month comic book, but tucked away in the very last panel was the first look at this new character, Wolverine. Roy Thomas, who was the editor-in-chief at Marvel at the time, must have just found out what an actual Wolverine was for the first time, because he wanted Len Wein to make a character with the name Wolverine, make him small, Canadian, and very fierce. All the traits of an actual animal Wolverine. He was originally just to be another throwaway character like the rest of the characters that fought the Hulk, but with a little luck of being passed around to different creators, Wolverine grew into one of the most popular characters of all time. In 2022, the average price for a Hulk 180 9.8 is about $27,600. In 2017, that same 9.8 averaged about $3,100, and in 2012, the average about $1,600. That had a 5-year return of 776% and a 10-year return of 1,611%, with a record price being almost $41,000 in 2021. Werewolf by Night, number 32, the first appearance of Moon Knight. Back in 1954, the Comics Code Authority came into place, banning many different things from appearing in comics, and one of those things was werewolves. But by 1971, the public landscape had changed, and so did the code. The code lifted their ban on werewolves and vampires, thus shortly after Werewolf by Night was born. Never really finding his true nemesis until issue 32, when he battled Moon Knight. Originally, he was a hired mercenary to kill werewolves, but after a couple issues, they decided to give him his own solo tryout in Marvel Spotlight 28 and 29. From there, they recasted him in more of a hero role, and saying he was on an undercover mission to learn more about the villains and not to kill werewolves. He then got his own series that over time started to develop him as a character, multiple personalities, and even his Egyptian themes. He went on to star in his own series on Disney Plus for one season with the possibility of his return. Nevertheless, he has slowly become a mainstay in Marvel Comics as a whole. In 2022, a 9.6 averaged 22,550. In 2017, that same 9.6 would average around 4,100, and in 2012, that 9.6 averaged about 1,100. That had a 5-year return of 445% and a 10-year return of 1,952%, with a record price in 2022 being $26,500. House of Secrets 92, the first appearance of Swamp Thing. Len Wein came up with the concept of the character, but didn't have a name for him yet. He would just call him Swamp Thing, and it stuck. Legendary horror artist Bernie Wrightson did many of the beginning issues. His first solo comic was canceled due to poor sales, but then in 1982, Wes Craven made a horror movie about Swamp Thing. To capitalize on the hype of the movie, they started the Swamp Thing comic line again. After a handful of issues, the comic was about to be canceled again due to poor sales. But one last-ditch effort to give free rein to an up-and-coming writer, Alan Moore, who revamped the character into a huge DC powerhouse. Swamp Thing went on to have multiple movies, along with a TV show that lasted 3 seasons, a cartoon that lasted only 5 episodes, and then in 2019 had another TV series based on him that was canceled due to inflated budget reasons. In 2022, a 9.4 averaged about $9,900. 2017, a 9.4 averaged about $6,048. And then in 2012, that same 9.4 averaged was about $1,700. That is a 5-year return of 64% and a 10-year return of 462%. Tomb of Dracula 10, the first appearance of Blade. Not until the revision of the Comics Code Authority in 1971 were vampires even allowed in comics. So once the ban on vampires was lifted, Marvel quickly jumped on the vampire train with Tomb of Dracula. Needing a nemesis, they quickly came up with Blade on issue 10. From the beginning, they wanted him to be a black man, and after a couple issues, they knew that Blade would become too popular, so they started to put him on the back burner. Blade would show up in other random issues of comics until his own miniseries in 1998. Went on to star in his own comic book movie, which wasn't normal for comic books to be turned into movies back then. The Blade movie predates Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and X-Men. Originally, the studio was going to have LL Cool J as the lead and go for more of a spoof movie. But David Goyer, the writer, convinced the studio to go into a more serious direction. The movie went on to spawn 2 sequels, a TV show, and with a reboot in the works for the MCU. In 2022, a Tomb of Dracula 10 and a 9.8 averaged around $37,400. In 2017, it was $4,400, and in 2012, it was $1,334. That was a 5-year return of 738% and a 10-year return of 2,704%, with a record price of $48,000 in 2021. Marvel Spotlight 5, the first appearance of the Ghost Rider. With the Comics Code being more lenient and opening the door for more supernatural characters, none is more popular than Ghost Rider. Making a deal with the devil to spare his father's life, he became the spirit of vengeance. But his creation origins are something to be contested. Gary Friedrich claimed that he was the one that came up with Ghost Rider, even though the name and the look were stolen from a previous Western-themed superhero with the same name a few decades prior. No one really cared until 2007 when Ghost Rider was made into a movie starring Nicolas Cage. Friedrich ended up suing Marvel over the ownership of the character. In the end, Marvel ended up winning, and Friedrich actually had to pay Marvel $17,000 in damages, stop selling Ghost Rider related items, and even had to stop saying he's the creator of Ghost Rider. The only thing he was allowed to do was to sell an autograph on an official licensed Ghost Rider merchandise. Ghost Rider went on to star on many of his own movies, TV shows, even video games, with rumors speculating on his debut in the MCU. In 2022, a Marvel Spotlight 5 in a 9.6 averaged around $69,000. In 2017, a 9.6 averaged around $6,000. And in 2012, it averaged around $1,868 with a 5-year return of 1,048% and a 10-year return of 3,594%, with a record price of $90,000 in 2022. Star Wars 1. Star Wars is probably the biggest film franchise in history, but did you know the comic came out prior to the movie ever being released? On April 12th of 1977, the first issue of Star Wars Comics 1 was released, a full month before the movie. George Lucas wanted to hype up the movie, so he went to Marvel Comics in 1975 about publishing Star Wars comic line. Stan Lee originally declined as it hadn't been released and any movie tie-in comics never really sold well. Lucas then tried again, but this time giving up any royalties unless the sales of the particular comic book sold over 100,000 copies. Once the movie came out, Star Wars comics became the top seller at Marvel. Even Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief at the time, said the strong sales of the Star Wars comic books saved Marvel Comics financially in 1977 and 1978. The series lasted up to 107 issues, where then Marvel lost the rights and eventually Dark Horse took over for 20 years. Disney, which owned Marvel at the time, bought the rights of Star Wars, and then in 2015 it had Marvel Comics publishing all Star Wars comics going forward. With Disney now owning Star Wars, you bet that there will always be some type of Star Wars in our lives for the rest of time. In 2022, a Star Wars 1 and a 9.8 averaged around $4,798. In 2017, a 9.8 was around $1,100. In 2012, it averaged around $404 for the same 9.8. A 5-year return of 333%, a 10-year return of 1,088% with a record price of $9,600 in 2022. Giant Size X-Men #1, the first appearance of the new X-Men. The original X-Men started in 1963 and ran until issue 66, where it was canceled. The X-Men were never really popular, nor did they sell well, but the writers at Marvel still liked them, so they would pop up in other superhero stories from 1970 to 1975. The original X-Men series would redo the covers and just turn them into reprints of previous issues, as Marvel did not want to let go of the X-Men, but thought if they just did reprints, it wouldn't cost them much. Then in 1975, they came out with a one-issue special with the new X-Men. This sold well enough to have X-Men 94 start up again with new original stories. The new group of X-Men soon became one of the most popular titles at Marvel. It seems weird to believe that at one point the X-Men were canceled because no one read them, because now they are one of the best-selling comics at Marvel. Countless numbers of movies, TV shows, cartoons, even video games have been made about the X-Men. The X-Men are here to stay, and this new team was the start of it all. In 2022, a Giant Size X-Men #1 and a 9.8 averaged around 48,500. In 2017, it averaged around 7,749, and in 2012, it averaged 4,830, with a 5-year return of 526%, a 10-year return of 904%, with a record price in 2021 for a 9.8 was $72,000. Amazing Spider-Man 129, the first appearance of the Punisher. Jerry Conway, the writer for Spider-Man at the time, was inspired by The Executioner, a popular book series at the time. He wanted to come up with someone who would be perceived as a villain at first, then later became a hero. He gave the script to Stan Lee, who was the editor-in-chief at the time. Stan Lee loved the concept, but didn't like his name. At the time, he was called the Assassin, and Stan Lee thought that there was way too much negativity around his name. Stan Lee then remembered he had some characters called the Punishers, which were Galactus's robot army. He decided to have Conway use the name instead of the Assassin. The Punisher is one of the most popular characters to come out in the 1970s for Marvel. He was one of the first characters to get his own theatrical release in movies in 1989's The Punisher, starring Dolph Lundgren. He went on to star in movies and even had his own Netflix series, along with video games and cartoons. In 2022, a Spider-Man 129 and a 9.8 averaged around 36,600. In 2017, it was 12,500, and in 2012, it was 5,890. That is a 5-year return of 193%, a 10-year return of 521%, with a record price being $57,000 in 2022. Incredible Hulk 181, the first appearance of Wolverine. With the Comics Code Authority loosening their reins, it opened up the ability to have more over-the-top and violent superheroes. The anti-hero really started to make some headway during the 1970s in comics, and none was as popular as Wolverine. Originally, he was created to be another Hulk throwaway villain of the month. He later appeared on the team of the new X-Men because he was Canadian, and the new X-Men were all mutants from across the globe. At first, Claremont and Cockrum were going to drop Wolverine from their X-Men books, but when John Byrne took over, being Canadian himself, he championed Wolverine, making him more front and center of the team. From there, he just got more and more popular, becoming one of Marvel's most popular characters of all time, being featured in countless comic books, movies, cartoons, and video games. With every year that passes, Wolverine becomes more and more popular, and this comic will continue to rise and be sought after. Many people consider this to be their holy grail book to own one day. In 2022, a 9.8 Hulk 181 averaged around 94,000. In 2017, a 9.8 averaged around 38,000. And in 2012, a 9.8 averaged around $10,875, with a 5-year return of 147% and a 10-year return of 764%. And that had a record price of $138,000 in 2021. I'm David from the Comic Book Investments. I hope you like that list. Let me know in the comments below if you have any of these on this list. Have a great day.